Friday, the final day of the week. These are the voyages of the program Unsportsmanlike Conduct. Its ongoing mission to explore strange new movies, to seek out new bits and new edifications, to boldly go where no radio program has gone before. Elkent's Movie Club. It's Elkent's Movie Club. Elkent's Movie Club. It's Elkent's Movie Club.
Indeed, it is another edition of Elkent's Movie Club right now here on Unsportsmanlike Conduct as we talk about the 1967 film The Graduate. Kent Wolgamott joining us. Hello, Kent.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am all right. Waiting up to see if I can see another epic choke coming up this evening.
Dude, what did you make of, I want to, before we get to The Graduate, mainly the Philadelphia one. I know that some other weird stuff has happened this week, but that game, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. I harbor no ill will towards the 76ers, and yet I could not stop laughing as they just completely melted down. It's probably some of my Eagles hate coming out because of all the fans, but I loved it. What did you make of how that game went in the second half, and particularly in the fourth quarter?
They went full Nebraska ball.
Oh, no. Two guys making field goals. That sounds about right.
And what they go 7 minutes without a basket
in
an NBA semifinals game.
Very close to watching
conference semifinals. That's unbelievable. I can't remember seeing anything like that, and it was hilarious. I thought Doc was going to have a coronary.
I'm pretty sure he did, just by looking at him.
And now, you think about it, Kent, with Doc, think of some of the meltdowns that he's been a part of. The Clippers were up 3-1, and they blew that huge lead that one time against the Rockets. He had one in Orlando. Like, this is a guy, as much as he is liked within the league, he's had a lot of these types of playoff failures over the years.
Yes, and he tried to say, "Oh, it's hero." They were trying to all play hero ball. No, they went completely flat. I've never seen anything like that for that long.
That works for one team, but when it happens with three teams that you've coached, it becomes a trait of yours.
Certainly is a trait. Do you think that they win tonight, or do you like Atlanta?
I like Atlanta. I think that has to get in your head, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so too. What do you think happens in the other game 6 tonight? Clippers.
Good question. Is Mike Conley going to play or not?
He'll have to be dressed out in some sort. I mean, he can't be in street clothes tonight, even if he has no intention of touching that court.
If he doesn't play, they're in trouble. I think. Yeah. But if he plays at all, I think they'll win.
Yeah, and another franchise, obviously, that has had a lot of playoff failures in this round. Clippers never made it to the conference finals. An incredible stat. They could finally.
All right.
They've never made it. They've never made it to the conference finals.
Not once.
I just assumed that they did when Doc was there once. No.
Yeah, they had
Chris Paul.
They had the loss to the Rockets that I just mentioned. They had that crazy series against the Thunder where Chris Paul turned it over off of his foot out of bounds.
I remember that.
And they lost that one, and then they had a couple other losses in either the first or second round. So
and how about Chris Paul getting tossed into the protocol?
I know. I thought that we were past so much of the COVID news with athletes, and so when you see. I mean, normally now when athletes are talking about COVID, it's why they're not getting vaccinated. But I thought we were past players getting, COVID. And so it's wait, what in the world? He's going to miss some games? So strange. It reminded me of 2020 all over again.
Was that a shot at Cole Beasley?
It was indeed a shot at Cole Beasley. All right, let's move on from the NBA and let's go to The Graduate. Kate, can we go behind the scenes and just let the listeners know about your direct message that you sent me the other day?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I get a message from Kent. I think this was Tuesday or Wednesday. Just hey, what's the movie again? I forgot. And I'm like, no worries. It's The Graduate. And then you responded.
I'm an idiot. I already watched it.
He already watched it, so
I feel like this is a me thing. Last time I was here, this happened with
that's
with
right.
Best in Show. And he watched Reservoir Dogs.
He watched, that's right. He watched Best in Show literally that day ahead of the interview. But we get to The Graduate.
You can blame me, Kent.
well, this fit of brilliance was I had to drive Miss Daisy on Sunday. She had a job, interpreting job for a couple hours, and so I drove her down to the job. It was Beatrice, and you know what there is to do in Beatrice on a Sunday afternoon?
Nothing.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I found a local coffee shop, put in the old AirPods, and watched it on my phone.
Perfect.
And then I was like, "Oh, what did I forget?"
So we begin our conversation about The Graduate. I mean, I don't really know, Ken, if we need to set this movie up, but I guess for those of you who've never seen it, or really those of you who have never heard of it, because if you haven't seen it, I totally understand that. Dustin Hoffman's character begins an affair after graduating college, doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life, begins an affair with the next door neighbor, I guess a family friend, Mrs. Robinson. This affair lasts for about half the movie. Halfway through a lot of pushing by his own family and by the Robinson family, he then goes on a date with his daughter, and he seemingly
with her daughter.
Excuse me. Yeah, he falls in love with her. This presents a whole host of problems, and the movie ends with one of the more famous finishing shots, right, Ken? And probably a movie that we've ever seen. I guess I don't know if I should spoil it or not. But that is The Graduate. I'd seen this movie, Kent, in high school. I did not like it in high school. And I watched it last night, and I absolutely loved it. And so I'm guessing that a part of that is just my age and not really understanding a lot of the themes. I guess take us into your mind as you watched this for the first time back in, whatever year it was, because I imagine that this movie lands differently to you than it does to somebody that's my age.
Oh, and it lands differently to me now than it did then.
Yeah.
And here's part of the reason. I probably watched this when I was in high school in the 70s. I didn't see it. I wasn't old. My mom would in no way let me go to see this when I was like 6 years old. Or
probably for the best
when it came out. So then, it kind of played as this story of the kid rebelling in a way against, you've got to go into business and plastics, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole affair. And it's a comedy. You got to keep that in mind. This really is a comedy. It was directed by Mike Nichols, who is a comedic writer and all that. It's a comedy. And yet it played as this sort of clash of generations thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you watch it now, and it felt like a time capsule.
Sure.
And it also didn't really have it only captured a little bit of that time, right? You're talking a 1967 movie, no hippies, no drugs, it was very much sort of upper middle class, California society rebellion almost within that little bit. On the other hand, it really captured that era, that place, those people. And I remember really liking it then, and I still think it's a really good movie.
Hey, so there's like TV lore back in like the 50s. You couldn't show married couples in bed together and things like that. And then obviously for the brief nudity that's in the movie, it's kind of flashing and then flashes away. Was that something because of like laws in making movies and nudity back in the 50s and the 60s, or was that just to incorporate how he was trying to look, not to look at the beginning?
I would say part B more than anything, but also this was before during the rating system. At that point, there were 4 ratings: G, PG, R, and X. Okay. And this thing somehow managed to get a PG. which
I wonder if that's because of that cut. That could be why.
it's precisely because of those quick cuts in that first when they're in the bedroom that first time.
Mhm.
I thought the exact same thing. That's what got it to PG. Had they not had the cuts and showed her, that would have been instant R.
What did you think, Kent, of the decision to tell Mrs. Robinson's daughter, Elaine, about the affair as early in the movie as it happened? You know, watching it so long ago, I'd forgotten about at what point that was, or if there was like hemming and hawing, and if they had gone out on dates and whatever before she finally knew. And you look at the timestamp, and I think there was still like a half hour, 45 minutes left in the movie last night when I'm watching that part. What do you think of that decision? Because I think it's a really interesting one, and it obviously affects then whatever happens the rest of the way.
I think two things. My gut tells me that there was something cut out in between, right? There was probably 5-6 minutes excised out because this movie only runs an hour and 40 odd minutes, right?
Yep.
And so that was one. And two, I think they really wanted to set up almost an extended ending where they end up going all over the state of California, essentially, which set up that famous ending scene, or actually series of scenes, from the time he starts running from the Alfa Romeo till he blocks the door. I'm trying not to give everything away.
Yeah.
To the ending scene, that's just like a one of the most famous sort of last, what would that be? Maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes?
Probably. Yeah.
Of a movie that there is that I can think of. You know?
When you go back and watch movies like this, and this is kind of what it's one of my pet peeves about older movies, to where when people are talking, the next person starts talking immediately after they finish their line, because obviously they've rehearsed it before. Does that ruin movies for you, or do you tend to just not notice things like that?
It doesn't ruin them, but it gives you that it's that weird 60s, 50s. There's an artificiality that brings through. And in this movie, it actually isn't bad when it's Anne Bancroft and Hoffman. That's pretty natural.
And more towards the end of the movie as well, I agree.
Yeah, but there's particularly when he's talking to the other men. They're jump right on each other, you know?
Yeah. You know, we mentioned the famous ending. It's hard not to talk about this movie without mentioning the soundtrack. Simon and Garfunkel. I was trying to think last night as I'm watching this movie if there has ever been a movie soundtrack as good as this one, or maybe that is so at place with this one, where I can think of a bunch of movies that we've watched over the course of the last year in the movie club where I don't think a whole lot about the music that is attached to it. I don't know what this movie is without the Simon and Garfunkel songs. I mean, it starts right at the beginning and then even at the ending. And it's like, what would this movie have been like without their music throughout?
It mentions them in the open credits too. It says Simon and Garfunkel at the very beginning of the movie.
Cuckoo, Mrs. Robinson. The really crazy thing about the use of the movie, is that they made the movie and they laid this Simon Garfunkel songs, or some of them, not the entirety of them, but some of them had already come out as singles, like Sound of Silence and that, and they laid them in simply as placeholders, right? And then Mike Nichols got to watching the movie and he said, I got to pay for this.
Yeah.
You know, I got to put these songs in the movie rather than commissioning a quote score. And then he got Paul Simon to, I believe, write 2 or 3 new songs for the movie, including, of course, Mrs. Robinson. And without those songs, I think it loses some of its iconic status. Would that be the way to put it?
Well, I think so.
I wonder if you get stuff like how good the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are with the music, how it ties in everything
Mhm.
there. If you don't have something like this as early as the 60s and kind of see how music can really tie a movie together like this did, because like I agree with Ken, if you don't have that, I don't think it has the same exact effect that just with the visuals.
Yeah.
And those guys that make the Guardians of the Galaxies movies, have they not picked just perfect
The best soundtracks.
Yeah.
I agree.
songs? Absolutely. Yeah.
Nick, I know you didn't get a chance to watch the whole movie, but I know that there was a couple things that you wanted to talk about from the early parts.
Yeah, the Simon and Garfunkel thing, absolutely. I think that was a good vibe setter
Mhm.
because I haven't seen a lot of old movies or classic movies. This is my first time going into it. It surprised me.
Mhm.
Like I heard it and I'm like, that's
I know that one.
and it was a movie from 1967 and I didn't think that was a common thing back then.
And it wasn't.
Right. So how modern that seemed to me, that was really cool.
Mhm.
Mrs. Robinson, as soon as it said the name of that lady,
Mhm.
my very first thought was, is that where the term Mrs. Robinson comes
It
from?
100% is.
I'm like,
Yes.
oh, there it is.
Well, I can't remember the name of it. There's that movie with Jennifer Aniston where she comes back and like kind of lives out the almost the same storyline. There's like a book written about it. I can't remember the name of the movie. We just watched it like a year ago, but I mean, it's this movie kind of set the tone for a lot of movies, and especially themed around affairs and things like that.
You think it still holds up, Kent?
Yeah, I think it does, with the caveat that it is a time capsule. That it, if you watch it, it is definitely a movie from the 60s. And it's also, even to the visuals, who was done by a Oscar-winning cinematographer, and they're great visuals, but they're also very 60s Hollywood cinematography, right?
Does that include the scuba suit where you have the goggles clearly on front of a camera with a movie reel of a pool in front of it?
Yes.
I thought that was great. The Jennifer Aniston movie, by the way, as rumor has it, I couldn't remember the name of it.
There is one really interesting factoid about this movie that I am about to lay on you guys. Dustin Hoffman was 29 years old when this movie was made, and Bancroft was 35.
It's so funny you say that, Kent, because I got an email about a half hour ago from a salesperson Chris, and he said, FYI, did you know that Dustin Hoffman and Anne Bancroft's actual age difference was only 6 years? Good show, go Bucks. He's an Ohio State fan. That is incredible.
I didn't think she looked that old. I was like, they could have found somebody a little bit older than this to play this part.
Yeah. Ken, speaking of it being of its time, so just a couple of quick lightning round questions for you with this movie. What was up with the bottles of booze? Is that how bottles of alcohol looked in the 60s?
Absolutely.
What are they pouring? They're like, you need both hands to like tip this monstrosity over.
They were giant.
They're huge.
Huge. In the 60s, I didn't have this, but in the late 70s, I'd get a Wild Turkey bottle that was yay big. I'm serious. Like,
did you notice in that
quart
scene?
and a half or 2 quarts, maybe half gallon of Wild Turkey. Weehaw!
The good old days.
Did you notice in that scene after he had come downstairs and Mr. Robinson walked in? He's like, "What are you drinking?" Scotch, and he said bourbon. He still poured him a glass of scotch.
Yeah, that was one of the first parts that made me laugh.
And how much booze was there in that movie?
Oh man,
I mean, and of course, right in that first scene. Well, did you know I was an alcoholic?
Yeah,
right. Yeah. We got there real quick.
Sucking it back. The other thing, Kent, did people propose this fast? Like, did relationships just boom, boom, boom? Suddenly you're off to the races? Is that how things worked in the 60s?
I think to some measure, particularly the
wealthy,
when they kind of force Elaine into
it's almost like an arranged relationship. Yeah.
And there was definitely some of that within that sort of, you were expected to find someone within your class, so to speak. And if you can't find someone, we'll find someone for you.
Yeah.
Thank God those days are dead, huh?
I liked it. Jimmy, you weren't a fan. Why were you not in on this movie?
It was a lot of what I already asked about the the quick repeated lines.
Just the datedness of it.
When I watch a movie, I want suspense to be like my belief. My belief. I want to not be able. I want to be taken away from the moment. I want to. I want to be out of my element. I want to be all bought in the story. When you have somebody that's like, "How are you? I'm really good. Oh, that's great to hear." And it's obviously rehearsed. Yeah. It just kind of ruins it for me. And then I don't know, like maybe it's because I haven't watched a ton of old stuff, and I do like some older movies, but it was a little too slow at the beginning for me, even though it's not that long. And then I think the acting was left a little wanting. But I mean, it wasn't horrible. I just wouldn't watch it again.
Kent, for those of us who did like it, and is there any like lesser movies or lesser known movies rather from that era that you would recommend if you were a fan of The Graduate?
Of The Graduate or from that era?
I guess, like, if you liked this movie, maybe another.
Well, here's another one of that approximate time. It's a little later. Is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid,
which is a great movie.
It's of that. This era is in Hollywood, in my view, anyway, is almost transitional. Right? This is kind of one of the first films that led to that when you had the emergence of Francis Coppola and Lucas and those people,
the golden age,
making their movies in the early 70s. Spielberg, before it became huge, when they were still making smaller movies. This movie kind of led into those kind of movies, but it was a big Hollywood movie, and they kind of followed that up. And trying to think what else from I'm thinking like late 60s to 72, 3, well, Butch Cassidy is the one that really hit. Considered for the role of Benjamin Braddock was Robert Redford.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. Interesting. That would have been a completely different movie.
And they said, no, he doesn't fit because he's too smooth. Part of the reason that they cast Dustin Hoffman is he was so awkward.
He plays that so well in this movie.
Yes.
I don't know if he was playing it. I think a little of that might have been genuine because it was a little too good for it to be acting.
Well, you know what I thought is there wasn't a lot of difference in some of the scenes from the way he was acting in Rain Man 30 years later.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Or 20 years later, I guess it would be. Yeah.
That was The Graduate. Happy that I was able to rewatch this movie. It's available on HBO Max if you've never seen it before, or if you're like Nick, you need to watch the final hour and change of it. It is John's pick for the next edition, Kent, and we are College World Series show next week, so our schedule's a little squirrely. So this will actually be for the first Friday in the month of July. John is heading back to HBO Max, and he is going with The Green Mile. The Green Mile. I've never watched this whole movie. He says, I know it's a little long, but we have a couple of weeks. Yeah, I've seen bits and pieces.
It's a really good movie. And I am going to tell you that for a period of time, a certain former professional football player by the name of Ray Caruth had the nickname of the Green Mile.
Oh, no.
And you'll find out why.
Yeah, you know his history. That is not a good thing. So you can check that out. I'll tweet out the link in just a few minutes with The Green Mile available on HBO Max. Kent, thank you so much. Have a great couple of weeks, and we'll talk to you in July.
Thanks, Kent.
Sounds good. See you guys.
All righty, later. That is Kent.